Centuries before supermarkets and seed catalogs, native communities were growing vegetables so tough they're still hanging on today. These crops outlasted empires, famines, and wars, proof that resilience was baked into their very roots. Most of us walk right past these plants without knowing their history, but for Native Americans, they were life itself. These weren't just foods, they were survival strategies, cultural cornerstones, and living testaments to the bond between people and land. So what made them so extraordinary back then? And why are they worth rediscovering now? Let's start with a plant that looks ordinary above ground but hides its real treasure beneath the soil: groundnuts. At first glance, groundnut vines don't look like much, just tangles climbing trees and curling along riverbanks from Canada to Florida. But underground, they hide strings of potato-like tubers connected by stems that sometimes stretch several feet. One good dig could feed a family for days. Native Americans knew this secret long before colonists arrived. They relied on groundnuts not just as food, but as reliable survival insurance. The Pilgrims even credited them with getting through that first brutal winter when traditional crops failed. Here's the kicker: groundnuts pack 3 times the protein of potatoes. We're talking 15 to 17% protein content. Remarkable for a wild tuber. Roast them and the flavor is nutty, slightly sweet, and far from the bland starch most people expect. And they're easy to grow. Groundnuts improve soil by fixing nitrogen, climb whatever support they find, and bloom with purple flowers that smell faintly of grape soda. Come fall, harvest is like a treasure hunt, digging chains of tubers from the earth. Early settlers called them Indian potatoes and depended on them heavily. Some communities might not have survived without them, yet today they've nearly vanished from memory. Most gardeners haven't even heard of them, despite being native to their own backyards. Growing them couldn't be simpler. Plant tubers in spring, give them a trellis or corn stalks to climb, and by autumn you'll have a whole new crop underground. Best part? They're perennial, producing year after year without fuss. Groundnuts were one of the frontier's quiet champions, a food so reliable it sustained generations, yet so overlooked it's nearly forgotten today. Jerusalem artichokes, the tough cousin with an identity crisis. Now, if the groundnut was the secret protein chain of the wilderness, the Jerusalem artichoke was its confusing cousin, the one with a name that makes no sense. It ain't from Jerusalem, and it sure as heck ain't an artichoke. Truth is, it's part of the sunflower family, but somewhere along the line, folks slapped the name Jerusalem artichoke on it, and it stuck. Native Americans weren't bothered by the name. They knew the truth. This knobby little tuber was good food. They'd dig it up, roast it, and turn it into something that tasted like a cross between a potato and a sweet nut. When winter came calling and other fresh foods were gone, sunchokes, as some call them now, kept bellies full. And here's where it gets downright interesting. Jerusalem artichokes are loaded with a special fiber called inulin. It don't just help digestion, it feeds the good bacteria in your gut, keeping your whole system running smooth. In modern words, it's a prebiotic superfood. But the real magic is how tough these little roots are. While your tomatoes wither at the first frost, Jerusalem artichokes just keep growing. Drought? No problem. Bad soil? They don't care. These things are the honey badger of vegetables. They'll grow in spite of you. You'd think a crop this hardy and this nutritious would be everywhere. But walk into a grocery store today, and if you're lucky, you might spot a few shriveled ones in a dusty corner of the produce section. Most folks have never even heard of them. Yet they still grow wild scattering themselves along roadsides and empty lots, just waiting for somebody to notice. Plant a few, and before long, they'll take over your yard. Persistent, resilient, and full of history. That's the Jerusalem artichoke. Forgotten by most, but still standing strong. Blue commas, the sweet secret of the meadows. Most folks stroll past a field of blue commas and think they're looking at nothing more than a patch of wildflowers. Purple-blue blossoms swaying in the wind, sure, but nothing worth more than a glance. But for thousands of years, native tribes from the Rocky Mountains clear to the Pacific coast knew better. They knew commas wasn't just beautiful, it was life itself. Here's the twist. Raw commas bulbs taste terrible. Bitter, starchy, and about as edible as a mouthful of chalk. But indigenous families figured out something remarkable. They dig massive earth ovens, sometimes 6 feet deep, line them with hot stones and wet grasses, then bury layers of commas bulbs inside. For 2 or 3 days, the heat and steam transform those bitter bulbs into dark, molasses-sweet food. Imagine unearthing natural candy that could last through the hardest winters. Harvesting commas wasn't a free-for-all either. Families managed meadows like gardens, returning year after year to the same spots. They'd burn back weeds and competing plants, making sure the bulbs had room to grow bigger and stronger. Knowledge of the best fields was passed down through generations, sometimes tied to entire family lineages. But there was danger in the dig. Commas had an evil twin, death commas, nearly identical at first glance. One bite of the wrong bulb, and it was all over. The safe kind bloomed deep blue to purple, while death commas carried pale yellow or white flowers. To the untrained eye, the risk was deadly. For those who knew the difference, commas was a powerhouse. High in complex carbohydrates and fiber, it gave steady energy to last through long winters. Families would dry hundreds of pounds, storing them in underground caches to draw on for months. Today, blue commas still blooms wild in the Pacific Northwest, feeding bees, butterflies, and anyone who remembers its story. But most folks only see the flowers, not the survival wisdom buried beneath the soil. Candy roaster squash, the Cherokees' winter treasure. While other tribes were pulling roots and berries for quick meals, the Cherokee were playing the long game. They had a squash so sweet and hearty, it could outlast the harshest Appalachian winters. They called it the candy roaster squash, and the name says it all. Picture this, a massive, colorful gourd, some weighing 40 pounds or more, its skin painted in streaks of orange, pink, or green. Slice it open, and the flesh glows bright orange, sweeter than most desserts and packed with vitamins. Roasted in the hearth, and the cabin fills with the smell of natural candy. Families didn't just eat it, they savored it. But candy roasters weren't just about taste. These squashes came with built-in armor. Their skins were thick enough to keep them fresh for months, sometimes 8 months or longer if stored properly. While other foods rotted away before spring, Cherokee families could count on candy roasters sitting in the pantry like dependable old friends. The Cherokee planted these beauties alongside corn and beans in the legendary Three Sisters system. Corn shot skyward, providing a trellis. Beans climbed the stalks, feeding nitrogen back into the soil. And candy roasters sprawled wide below, smothering weeds with their broad leaves. It wasn't just farming. It was a centuries-old partnership between plants, perfected by observation and patience. Versatility made the candy roaster shine even brighter. Roasted, it was sweet as pie. Mashed into soups or stews, it gave a hearty richness. And when Cherokee cooks wanted dessert, it kept eyes sharp through long, dark winters, and with steady calories, it kept families alive until the thaw. Today, you'd be lucky to see a candy roaster squash outside a dedicated heirloom garden. Most grocery shoppers have never even heard of it. But for the Cherokee, it was more than food. It was survival wrapped in sweetness, and proof that patience always pays off. Wild ramps. Spring's wake-up call. After months of snow, dried corn, and whatever salted meat managed to last, spring in the eastern woodlands brought a miracle. A green miracle that pushed through the forest floor like nature's own trumpet call. Folks called them wild ramps. And for Native Americans and settlers alike, they were survival on a plate. At first glance, ramps don't look like much. Broad green leaves sprouting from purple stems with a little white bulb tucked underground. But pull one up, take a bite, and you'll understand why people hiked miles to find a patch. They tasted like garlic and onion rolled into one. Sharp, wild, and so strong you could smell it on a man's breath for days. That's why school teachers in Appalachia dreaded ramp season. Kids would come in stinking so bad from family feasts that some teachers sent whole classes home. But no one cared. After a long winter, ramps weren't just food. They were medicine. They packed more vitamin C than citrus, fighting off scurvy and reviving bodies starved for greens. Harvesting ramps took wisdom. Native foragers never yanked whole patches. They'd pick leaves first, saving bulbs for later. If you dug too greedy, the patch wouldn't return next spring. And here's the kicker. Ramps can take 7 years to mature from seed. Wipe out a patch, and it's gone for good. Flavor-wise, ramps were the spark that lit up dull winter meals. Tossed in stews, fried with potatoes, or eaten raw with cornbread, they turned simple suppers into feasts. Families even held ramp festivals, part celebration, part survival ritual, honoring the wild gift that meant spring had truly come. Today, ramps still grow in rich, moist soil under maples and oaks, from Canada clear down to the Carolinas. They're treasured by chefs now, fetching high prices at farmers' markets. But for mountain families, they'll always be more than trendy. Amaranth, the ancient superfood. Most folks today hear the word amaranth and think it's some new health food craze dreamt up by city folks in yoga pants. Truth is, this little plant has been feeding people for over 8,000 years. Long before supermarkets, long before vitamins came in bottles, amaranth was already doing the heavy lifting. Native communities across the Americas treated amaranth like gold. They didn't just eat the seeds, they used every part of the plant. The leaves cooked like spinach, loaded with iron and flavor. The seeds ground into flour for porridge or baked goods. And for a little fun, they even popped those seeds like popcorn, making crunchy snacks that had put modern granola bars to shame. Here's the kicker. Amaranth seeds are one of the few plant foods with all 9 essential amino acids. That makes them a complete protein, right up there with meat and eggs. Not bad for something most people mistake for a weed. The Aztecs called it huautli, and they valued it so much they made sacred figures out of amaranth dough during religious ceremonies. Spanish conquerors? They saw that and outlawed it, afraid of the power this humble grain held over people. Imagine a plant so important, it got banned. Amaranth's packed with calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, the kind of minerals that keep bones strong when winters are long. Growing amaranth today almost feels rebellious. While everyone else sticks to corn and beans, you're planting a food that once fed empires. It doesn't ask for much, just a little dirt, a little sun, and it gives back plenty. Maybe that's why it's still around, waiting to remind us that some so-called superfoods ain't trends at all. They're ancient truths we forgot. Pole beans, the climbers that changed farming. Now, if amaranth was the ancient powerhouse, pole beans were the genius engineers of native farming. These little rascals didn't just feed families. They changed the way people thought about growing food. Unlike bush beans that sprawl across the ground, pole beans shoot straight up, wrapping themselves around whatever's handy. Native farmers figured out the perfect partnership: plant beans alongside corn. The corn gave the beans a ladder, and the beans repaid the favor by fixing nitrogen into the soil. The beans themselves came in a rainbow of colors: deep purples, speckled reds, creamy whites, mottled browns. Each variety carried its own personality. Some cooked up soft and creamy, perfect for soups, while others held firm with a bold, earthy bite that could stand up in stews all winter long. The real magic happened underground. While most crops robbed the soil, pole beans were like quiet bankers, depositing nitrogen that enriched the earth. Families could count on fields staying fertile without chemical help, a trick nature herself perfected. But the brilliance didn't stop there. Families practiced careful seed saving, choosing the best and strongest beans from each harvest. Over time, this created hundreds of varieties, each adapted to local soil and weather. Some were bred for drying, others for fresh eating, and every bean told a story about the people who grew it. And let's not forget the beauty of it. Imagine a cornfield dotted with climbing beans, purple pods twisting up golden stalks, speckled beans dangling like ornaments. It wasn't just farming, it was art. Today, most folks grab the same old green beans at the grocery store, bland and predictable. But tucked away in seed banks and backyard gardens are the heirloom pole beans that once defined survival. They remind us that food isn't just about calories. It's about partnership, diversity, and wisdom passed down through generations. Pole beans didn't just grow food, they grew smarter farming. And that's a lesson worth climbing back to. Skirret, the sweet root, that time forgot. Now some crops were bold and showy, but skirret was the quiet worker of the colonial garden. These slender white roots didn't scream for attention, like corn or beans. Instead, they waited underground, biding their time until families needed them most. Picture a bunch of skinny parsnips tangled together, sweet and earthy, with a flavor somewhere between a carrot and a potato. Native people and early settlers knew exactly what they had with skirret. It wasn't just tasty. It was dependable. When harsh winters left cupboards bare, skirret came out of the soil like an old friend, ready to fill bellies. What made it special wasn't just its flavor. Skirret is packed with fiber, more than most roots could ever dream of. That meant it kept families full longer, gave them steady energy, and kept their bodies running smooth during long, lean months. A plant that nourishes and sustains, that's no small thing on the frontier. And here's the real beauty. Skirret is a perennial. Plant it once, and it comes back year after year without fuss. That made it a gift to families who couldn't risk starting from scratch every spring. Less work in the fields meant more time to hunt, build, or simply survive. Colonists would roast it, mash it, or boil it into hearty stews. Its natural sweetness gave meals a comforting edge, the kind that made winter nights just a little easier to bear. But somewhere in the 1800s, skirret slipped through the cracks. Maybe it was too humble, too plain compared to flashy imports. Maybe folks just forgot the value of a root that didn't demand much. Today, skirret is almost a ghost in American gardens, remembered only by a few heirloom growers. But every time a root is dug up, roasted golden, and savored, it carries with it the quiet wisdom of generations who trusted this crop to get them through. Skirret never made headlines, But for families clinging to survival, it was the backbone of the table. And sometimes, the quietest crops tell the loudest stories. Tomatillos, the tangy green gem of the ancients. Before the tomato became king of the garden, its cousin was already holding court. Tomatillos, wrapped in their little papery lanterns, were feeding people across the Americas long before anyone thought of ketchup or pasta sauce. The Aztecs called them tomatal, the very word that gave us tomato. But here's the twist. Tomatillos aren't tomatoes at all. They're closer kin to ground cherries, with that telltale husk that cradles the fruit until it's ripe. Peel it back, and you've got a firm green globe, tart and tangy, bursting with flavor that could brighten the dullest winter stew. Native farmers weren't guessing when they planted tomatillos. They knew exactly what they had, a fruit that produced heavy yields, resisted pests, and kept families nourished. The plants sprawled and bushed out, heavy with dozens of fruits, each one a packet of vitamin C and antioxidants. In times when disease stalked the hungry, that kind of nutrition meant survival. Flavor was the real secret weapon. Raw tomatillos bite sharp, almost citrus-like with hints of apple, but cook them down and magic happens. Modern gardeners are just waking up to the secret. Plant two, and you'll get pounds of fruit by summer's end. They're easy, they're tough, and they're every bit as useful as they were centuries ago. Tomatillos might not have the fame of their red cousins, but make no mistake, these green gems were a cornerstone of survival. They remind us that the best foods don't just fill bellies, they lift spirits. Wild rice, the sacred grain of the lakes. When most folks hear rice, they think of endless paddies in Asia. But for the people of the Great Lakes, wild rice, or manumin, meaning the good berry, was something much deeper. It was food, yes, but it was also prophecy, ceremony, and survival. Centuries ago, the Anishinaabe were told to follow a vision, to travel west until they found the place where food grows on water. And sure enough, in the shallow lakes and slow-moving rivers of the upper Midwest, tall green grasses swayed heavy with seeds. This was it, food so abundant it seemed placed there by the Creator himself. Harvesting wild rice wasn't just practical, it was ritual. Two people in a canoe, one guiding quietly with a pole, while the other bent stalks over the boat and tapped them with wooden knockers. Some seeds fell in, enough for the family. The rest dropped back into the water, ensuring next year's harvest. A cycle of respect and renewal. Nutritionally, wild rice leaves regular rice in the dust. It's got twice the protein, more fiber, and a nutty, earthy flavor that made stews hearty and satisfying. High in B vitamins, iron, and antioxidants, it kept communities strong through the long winters. For people facing hunger, a pot of wild rice wasn't just food. It was medicine, strength and warmth in a bowl. And here's the wild truth. Wild rice isn't rice at all. It's the seed of an aquatic grass, perfectly adapted to wetlands. In growing, it built ecosystems. Ducks, muskrats, fish, all thrived in the same waters that fed the people. Protect the rice, and you protected the land, the animals, and your own family. But the modern world didn't always see it that way. Today, most wild rice in supermarkets is cultivated in flooded paddies, far from its natural home. Real hand-harvested wild rice is rare, costly, and often sold only through native cooperatives. It's more than food. It's a living tradition. Every grain tells a story. A canoe gliding silently across a lake. A people keeping faith with their prophecy. And a reminder that true wealth is found not in gold, but in food that grows on water.